wonderful to see everybody, and wonderful to be back. Wonderful to be back here with you all at St. Monica, and I think, thank you, Abuna, thank you, Father, for inviting me again, and for the kind words, and also for building what I think what you have here on Tuesday nights. I said this, I think the last time I was here was a little over a year ago, but I think every time I follow on Instagram and I see, and the picture keeps getting bigger and bigger, you know? So I've also learned that this is like, maybe we're at 40% capacity, right? And the other 60% will be here, you know, in the middle of the talk. And I'm expecting that, and that's fine. But it's wonderful to see how this keeps growing, right? And how many more people see even as I speak, you know? Now we're at 50% capacity, and we'll just keep going. It is transactional, right? So I just want to keep, the talk is only as good as many people are here, right? So that's that's the whole point of the talk, right? It's only good if we sell out the stadium. Sorry. I think it's wonderful what you're building here. I think what you guys are doing here is phenomenal. And I think one of the, I was thinking about this, I was meditating on this a few days ago, as I knew I was coming, was one of the reasons I think so many people come on Tuesday nights here, there's a number of reasons, a myriad of reasons. But I think one of the big reasons why is we're starting to realize that anything you're doing outside of here isn't satisfying you, right? This is not a Sunday school lesson. This is not like fourth grade where you're, I'm going to reference that a lot because there's some unlearning we have to do, right? This is not like mom and dad are forcing you to come on Tuesday night, right? Like, well, unless you're dad, you know? But this isn't something, this is a choice. And so part of being in the world is you're going to start realizing this is graduate young professionals, right? As you guys are young adults and you get further and further into adulthood, things become less satisfying. It's like you go out and you do those activities, you go out and do those things that normally were fun and normally felt like they were fulfilling for you. And then after a time, they just become unfulfilling. It's like having a meal of like food that isn't nutrient dense, and then you find yourself still hungry because it wasn't filling. I ate a lot of stuff, but I wasn't full, right? And if that's not it's not fulfilling out there, it's not filling you, then you're going to start coming here. And that's why I think this is more and more crowded and more people keep coming, because people have a deep yearning for something that's beyond what is of the world, right? A verse that I'm going to reference often tonight is from 1 Corinthians, where St. Paul says, "Has God not made foolish the wisdom of this world?" Right? So we're trying to unlearn every time we're here, but particularly tonight when we're talking about transactional Christianity, is we're trying to unlearn the wisdom of the world, the quote-unquote wisdom of the world, right? We're trying to unlearn this. It's not, that wisdom of the world is something we have to shake off, you know? So God bless your service. God bless what you guys are doing, and I hope this continues to bear fruit as we go forward here. We also started learning a lot. I do want to just ask for the intercession of my brother, Mark Malik, in prayer. Because many of us buried him this Saturday, so sorry. It's the first time I've spoken since he passed, right? So this is for you, Mark, and I hope he's somebody. I have to tell you a story. When I first came back from my first Olympics, I mean, Matt, you remember this. He forced me to talk. I hadn't given a talk like this in front of other people in like, I don't know, it was like 5 years. I got in taught. And Mark Malik, I don't know, many of you don't know him, he forced me. And he forced Abuna Krolos, and some people at church, he was like, this guy's got to talk, he's got it's a really unique experience, he's got to talk. And he died, if those of you who don't know him, passed away in his low 50s of a pancreatic cancer this Saturday. And he's someone who forced me into the service on multiple occasions when I didn't want to, right? And pushed me into this. And so I intercede on our behalf, Mark, for prayers. And I knew it would be hard 3 days after the funeral to give this talk, but I didn't want to not show up, you know, for him. So pray for us, Mark, and intercede for us. So now the awkward part's out of the way. So tell me, when I say something like transactional, right? When I say transactional, there's kind of like a buzzword that goes around right now. It's like about transactional relationships. Anybody feel like they've been in a transactional relationship before, a transactional friendship before? Yeah. Like, what does that look like, you know? That transactional relationship, like some of the people that you might be seeing, or the friends that tell you, like, we haven't hung out in a while, I guess we're not friends, right? Or like, you know, the person you're dating, say, well, I didn't get this from you, so I guess you don't love me, right? Like, these types of transactional relationships, we kind of count sometimes in relationships. I know that there's a danger. I want to use the word dangerous because this is dangerous thinking for us earlier when he introduced me, is I know that it's very easy in long-term relationships and marriages to get into transactional feeling in the relationship. Like we start counting things. My wife and I will count, right? And this is when we start getting into fights, right? It's like, I did the dishes 5 times this week. You did the dishes twice. 5 is greater than 2, I win, right? So if I win, right, that means I get the prize, right? I get the cookie at the end of the day. This is how it is. So it's very dangerous and it's very easy for us to get into transactional thinking in our relationships. And it doesn't feel good, right? For some of you guys who are saying or have felt you've been in a transactional relationship, it doesn't feel right? It's not very fulfilling. The wisdom of the world that we were talking about earlier, that is essentially this transactional relationship is built into all the systems of the world, work, school, it's all transactional, right? You're going to school, you're paying money to go to med school, right? You're paying your money to go to grad school. You're going through you're paying to go undergrad in college, and you're paying so that you can get a degree, right? So you can have this transaction, and then once I get this degree, right, then I'm going to use this piece of paper to go get more green pieces of paper afterwards to pay back the transaction that I made to get in the first place, right? This is the nature of the world is built on this, and so what we're trying to unlearn tonight is how this has affected us. So you may not be thinking that. You may not feel like you're a transactional person. You may not feel like you're in a transactional relationship with your friends. You may not feel like you're in a transactional relationship with God. You may not feel like you're in a transactional relationship with the church. You may not feel these things on the surface, but I can tell you that all of us have internalized this in one way, shape, or form deep down. We've all internalized this type of thinking one way, shape, or form. We have, myself included. I'm not up here because I know something better. I'm just here because someone told me to, right? I'm like you, right? But I can tell you, I count sometimes. Last week, because I was at a funeral and because I go to the liturgy during the week and stuff, I counted. I went to 4 liturgies last week. That means I took communion 4 times. That means I'm 4 times better than you, right? I have a 4-time more likely chance to go to heaven than you do, right? That's how it works, right? And because I took communion 4 times and I went to 4 liturgies and all these things, then God's going to reward me, right, well this week, right? Every light will be green as I'm driving, right? Everyone will be kind to me. No one at work is going to give me a hard time because God favors me because I went to 4 liturgies last week. This is funny, I'm saying all this, but do you ever feel that? I feel that way sometimes. I feel like I did so much this week, Lord. Where's my reward? Hook me up, man. Like I did this. Where's the next thing for me? And we find ourselves counting. You ever find yourself counting like this too, right? I went to the Tuesday night Kenonia meeting at St. Monica. Then I went to this Bible study, with Abdou on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I went to Coptic Club at my college, right? And then Saturday, I went to Vespers. And then Sunday, I went to 5 things this week, Lord. Something good's got to happen, right? You ever had your parents or anybody tell you, like, hey, for you to get into college, you got to start fasting. If you don't fast, you're not going to college. I had parents tell me this. I've counseled families that have told me, okay, we really want young John to get into UCI. Listen, it's really hard, man. 150,000 people applied there last year. Like, I wish you all the best. Okay, well, we're going to fast, and because this Lent, and he's going to be really serious in Lent so that he can get in to college later. We're laughing because this doesn't make sense, right? But this type of thinking and this type of being is deeply, deeply, deeply rooted in everything that we do, right? I used to think when I was a kid that if I ate Funyuns, I was breaking my fast. Because we would take the Funyun bag, right? A lot of people still eat Funyuns? They're pretty darn good, right? But on the back of Funyuns, there's a buttermilk ingredient. And we're not sure anymore. Thank you, RFK. But if I keep reading these, sorry, that one was for you. If I keep reading the label, it'll say like buttermilk. I'm like, I tripped something up, right? I tripped up. I had buttermilk. I broke my fast, right? So the fast is all broken. What do I do now, right? I broke my deal. I think I broke Abdou Augustine. Completely. So I got to move on. So for us to unlearn some of these things, this is part of going into adulthood, right? We're at 70% capacity now, right? 80%, we're getting there. It's much of your stage of life is unlearning the things we taught you in Sunday school when I was your Sunday school teacher. It's unlearning some of the things we taught you when you were in 3rd and 4th grade. Because when we are on a developmental spectrum, right? When we're on a developmental climb, there's certain things we had to teach you when you were younger for survival and for connection to the church. But some of those things we now have to unlearn as we're older. So much of what we're doing now, much of the spiritual life as you get older becomes about unlearning. So stick with me. There was a TV show, I don't know how many of you guys watched this TV show called The Good Place. Anybody see the TV show The Good Place on NBC? It's a pretty interesting show. If you can get past the blasphemy, it's a good watch, you know? But if we can filter through a little bit of that, you know, and don't get me in too much trouble. But essentially the premise of the show, right? The premise of the show is that there's a point system, right? There's a complete point system for heaven and hell. The good place is a metaphor for, you know, heaven, right? And, you know, you don't want to end up in the bad place, right? And so to not end up in the bad place, there was a ledger being kept in, you know, the good place. And on that ledger, right, this is the main character's, right, ledger, these are the things that she did, right? And it kept it was a point system, and it took a certain amount of points to get into heaven, right? So just based on this premise, there's obviously some satire, right, that on some of the things we're talking about, but it makes some sense. I used to think this, right? I used to think when I was a kid, and maybe some of you think the same thing, because I went to 4 liturgies last week, and I took communion 4 times, that makes up for the 5 times that I was rude to my wife and my friends and the coworker or the subordinate at work that I was kind of a jerk to, right? That makes up for it, though, because I did those other things. So if those 4 liturgies are worth 100 points each, I got 400 points. But those 5 times I was rude to somebody was only minus 15 points every time I was rude to somebody. I'm still winning, right? I'm still getting an A in this thing, right? So the premise got me thinking. It also made me laugh a lot, too, because if you ended slavery, you got 814,000 points. But if you committed genocide, right, you minus 430. I don't think this math adds up, but this is all a joke, right? But, you know, minus 433,000 points if you commit genocide. But you only get plus 814. I thought I'd get more for ending slavery than that. I thought that would be worth more points. But you can ruin an opera with boorish behavior, and that's only minus 90 points, right? There's only minus 90 there. If you can maintain composure in a line at a water park while in Houston, plus 61 points, yeah? I think it's worth much more than that, but I'm trying to get into heaven here, guys, you know? Tell a woman to smile, minus 53. Remember that, gentlemen, right? Tell a woman to smile, the minus 53 points, right? Make sure you're there. If you remain loyal to the Cleveland Browns, it's plus 53 points, you know? This is hilarious. I thought this show was very funny to me. It got me thinking. Again, forgive me, right, if I'm there. But this point system made us feel like there's it really resonated with me because it reminded me how I felt like there was a fixed equation of how I can get into heaven. There was some sort of fixed equation for me to get there. So I'll start with NBC shows, but I'll eventually get to the fathers of the church. Don't worry about it. Some of the thinking that we've gotten to, let me just go back to this for a second. Sorry. Some of the thinking that we've gotten to has been based on our understanding of the world, and I said this already, right? So I want to ask you a question. Is it possible to get an A in a class without learning anything at all? Everybody nodded their heads. Everybody nodded their heads. Is it possible to get an A in a class without learning anything, right? It's possible. I took 4 years of Spanish in high school, and my Spanish is lo mismo, you know, ahora de, you know, yesterday, whatever yesterday is in Spanish. I'm not sure. I didn't have a good enough teacher as like Gabby, right? But my Spanish sucks. I got an A, I'll tell you that. I did whatever it took to get an A, right? So is it possible to get an A in a class and not learn anything? So then is it just possible to feel like you're getting an A in Christianity and not have a connection to God? 100%. You can feel that connection. You can feel like you're winning without actually doing the thing, right? Without actually feeling that actual transformation that we're looking for. So when we internalize this type of thinking, it actually becomes real in its consequences, right? So in social psychology we learn, right, when we believe a situation is real, then it becomes real in its consequences. So on the underlying internalization of this transactional Christianity, there are real consequences to this in our behavior, right? And if you think that this point system is how you're going to get into heaven, right, then there are ways that we are going to behave in order for us to get to that A, right? If winning or getting an A in a class, if getting an A in a class is the most important thing, then you can understand why people cheat. Right? You can understand why is cheating so rampant? Because I got to get an A. Because the A is the most consequential thing in my life. People look for shortcuts. You guys come from the sports world, right? And in sports, if winning is at all costs, if winning is at the forefront of everything I do, then I'm bound to cheat. I'm bound to cut corners because I'm doing this because I need to win, right? So you can understand why people take steroids. You can understand why people, point shave, do other stuff, whatever they need to do, because I can understand that because winning is at all costs. But that's not why we do it. That's not why I'm into sports, right? It's not why I'm into the battle. It's not why I'm trying to do that. So it becomes real in its consequences. So let's unpack how we got here, right? If we know that this is true and we've set the stage that we've internalized this transactional Christianity somewhere deep down in our souls, whether we know it or not, how did we get here? Part of this is we've created a system of rewards and punishments. And we feel like there's a rewards and punishment system with God. And we feel like there's a rewards and punishment system in our churches, in our systems. And part of this is when I love speaking to this age group and this to adults, because we can really start thinking about how this reflects in the systems that we're a part of. The church is not something that's outside of you. You are the church. We are the church, right? So when we feel these things bleed into the systems of our church and the systems that we're doing, be careful. Be watchful, right? It's dangerous, as Abuna said, right? So how can we see how these things... So part of it is this rewards and punishments, and some of it gets internalized normally in other religions, like the picture I put up there, right? Like it's easy to get to where we think about this, right? You see a Catholic confessional. Some of us went to Catholic school when we were younger, right? And I went to the Catholic school in Houston, Texas, actually, right? Where the nuns used to hit us with the ruler on our fingers, right? Do you guys remember that? Anybody go to school like that? Right? And what you'd do is you'd have to put your hands on the top of the desk, right? And she'd say, put your hands out. And then she'd come by, the nun would come by with the ruler, and she'd smack your fingers really hard, right? Right on your knuckles. And I'd get these red knuckles, and I came home. And I thought that was normal. I thought it was super normal, right? I thought it was super normal that nuns hit people, I internalized that, like nuns hit. I said, okay, cool, right? That's what church is like. Nuns are going to hit me. So when a priest slapped me for the first time, I was like, okay, this is normal, right? Like you're supposed to, hit me harder. It was a joke, and it felt like you should be going harder. But what happens in that same confessional? You go in that Catholic confessional, you say, Father, right? Forgive me, I have sinned. I say my sins. And what happens after that in the Catholic confessional? Yeah, you get a prescription, right? All right, you've been diagnosed, you're a sinner. The prescription is you're going to do, he said, 14 Hail Marys, 50 prostrations, right? 25 Our Fathers, and you'll be fine. Go, right? So if I do these things, my sins will be wiped away, right? There's going to be a transaction in this confessional. And again, is there room for penance? I'm not here to debate, right, the theology behind it. Is there room for penance from God? Is there room for, some things that we have to give back? For sure. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to unpack how we got to this level of thinking. I'm trying to unpack how we got to this socialization around this transaction. So first and foremost, we've kind of thought of this as rewards and punishments. We've also thought about this in school and work, right? So when you're in school, the wisdom of the world has taught us that I got to go to 11th grade, and then after 12th grade, I'm going to go to college, and then when I go to college, I got to go to grad school, or I got to get a job, and then once I'm in that job, I got to move up in that job, right? And each level has its own transactions. Most of you are in the workforce right now. In the workforce that you're in right now, you start as a coordinator. What comes after coordinator? Manager, right? And then after manager, you're going to be a director, and after director, you'll be a senior director, and after that, you can be a VP, or you're going to be a chief, or you'll be in the C-suite, and you've based your entire existence on the transaction of me going to work, getting a paycheck, and moving up this ladder. So you can see how that can be internalized to how you feel about church, because everything you do outside of these walls is in that same transaction. So you can't I don't blame the young man that says, I was a chanter, and one day I'm going to be bishop, right? Because they are built to look up and say, well, I'm going to become a deacon, then I get to be a subdeacon, right? Then I'm going to be a deacon, then I'm going to be a priest. I'm going to go all the way. I'm going to make it to the top, I don't blame that person because that's how we think. That's how the world thinks, and it comes this way. Of course, then we try to correct that thinking, right? And we try to break that down and unpack how we've been socialized in this. So some of this is based on our rewards and punishments. Some of this is about how we view heaven and hell. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I'm the wrong person on the theology of hell, right, to discuss this. But I went down this rabbit hole for a few years where I was trying to figure this out. And I went to people much smarter and wiser than I and who can discuss this. And that's not going to be me. But how we view heaven and hell, especially the way the church has taught us, especially when we were young, was in a transactional way. Do this, go to heaven. Don't do all these things, and you'll avoid hell, right? Do the bad things, and you're guaranteed to be punished in hell. So what we have learned when you get into this, and I'll just breeze through some of the theology, and you can take a deeper dive into this if you want and go to your spiritual fathers about it, right? Is that this idea of hell being like a torture chamber, like a box down there with little like demons that all have pitchforks, right? And the second you have the Funyuns, right? Too many Funyuns during Siyam, and you've cheated on all your tests, that somebody kicks you down into hell, and all these demons are going to pitch at you with the pitchforks, right? That's just not true, right? That's not true, okay? It's not true. A theologian once said, the road to heaven is heaven and the road to hell is hell, right? On my way, right? Heaven is here on earth, hell is here on earth, right? And those places, right? What hell becomes and what heaven is our choice of what we want our relationship with God to be. It becomes a choice, and I'm going to reference some people now about it. But what the church has done over the year, every church, not just ours, every church, every religion has done, is we try to simplistically take this massively complicated, nuanced theology of God and break it down into heaven and hell. So it's time, when you're in third grade, it's kind of good to know that. It was good for me to know that I might go to hell if I steal the Snickers bar from the liquor store down the street from church, because it kept me from doing that too often, right? Right? I only did it a few times, and then that's what I had to go confess everyone about. I grew up at Holy Virgin Mary up in LA, and if you walk down the street, there was this liquor store on the corner, and what we would do is right after communion, we'd run down there, right? Steal as much candy as we could, and then run back to church, and go to Sunday school and be late for Sunday school, and we'd have like all these things coming out of our pocket, and I mean, when you're in fifth grade, you don't have a lot of money, right? But I had access to doing those things. So much of my confession back then was very simple. Abuna, I stole a Snickers bar, maybe some Skittles, right? What did I do wrong? And he said, well, yeah, if you keep doing these things, you're going to go to hell. I probably needed that at fifth grade. But at this point, I know better now why I don't want to do that, right? But it makes sense. But so that simple theology is too simple for you all. It doesn't work for us anymore as adults. Just say, don't do bad things, right? There's a character on the show in The Good Place. Again, not plugging the show. But that as they were going through this whole point system, right, they try to find the one guy who had the most points on earth. And they said, who had the most points on earth? This guy's for sure going to the good place because he has all the points. The person who had all the points was essentially like a guy who just hid in his house and never did anything at all, right? And like never left, right? And like had his own self-sustaining farm, right? Just living enough the place, didn't interact with anybody, and just said like, and then he was like racking up the points on a daily basis, right? Because he was fine. So is the point of Christianity to avoid all things and just hide in our cell and we all become monks? Or 100% of us are going to become monks and nuns in this? That doesn't make sense. Why would God create this earth and give us all these things that we have just so we can go hide and not interact with each other, right? And keep doing these things. When you play a game, you don't play the game to avoid losing. You do it to try to express yourself, and if we win, it's a byproduct of what happens, right? So we can't just play this Christianity game to avoid losing, to avoid hell, right? I'm just doing this to avoid hell. So St. Isaac the Syrian says, hell is an effect, not a substance. Hell is an effect, not a substance. And I think he explains it better here. He says that punishment arises from the people realizing they are incapable of participating in love of God. So really what hell is people feeling disconnected from God and feeling that love and not being able to accept it and not being in a position to accept it. What's worse than that? Somebody you really hate and they just are loving to you back all the time. Anyone ever experienced that? I just don't really like this person, and yet they keep being nice to me, right? That's hell, right? There's nothing you can do back to that person. There's literally nothing you can do back at that point, right? And that's what it is. This is hell, the negation of love, the return of hate for love. The return of hate for love. I'm given hate, and all I'm getting back is love. And when I can't accept that, that's the hell that I'm in. To be surrounded by love and to have hate in one's heart. This is the eternal condition of all the damned, all the people in hell. They are all dearly loved. All the damned are dearly loved Keep this in mind as we keep going, right? All the damned are dearly loved. They are all invited to the joyous banquet, the way we talk about the joyous banquet, right? That's how we describe heaven, right? We describe it as like the banquet, the table that we all eat at together, right? They are all living in God's kingdom in the new earth and the new heavens, and no one expels them. Even if they wanted to go away, they cannot flee from God's new creation, nor hide from God's tenderly loving omnipresence, the omnipresence of God's love. So what hell is, when St. Isaac says it's an effect, not a substance, it's the effect of being disconnected from God. It's not the cartoon, right, that we saw before where I'm living in a torture chamber all because I'm a bad person, right? It's because I'm disconnected from God's love. That's a choice. It's a choice that I have, right, to be away from these things. So you can see how that type of thinking, I couldn't teach you about Isaac the Syrian when you were in 5th grade, right? We just had to say, do bad things, go to hell. Do good things, go to heaven, right? So it's easy to see how this can be transpired. So this type of thinking has like a significant amount of consequence. I want to use the word dangerous. I'm going to keep referring to that because it can be dangerous in how we think with our relationship with God and our relationship with the church. One, it can create shame, despair, and guilt because I feel like, well, I screwed up. I can't do anything next. I'm just no good, right? It can create this guilt that I continue to do these things, and it separates us from repentance. It separates us from the cycle of being able to fall down and get back up, right? People leave the church, people leave their families because they feel like I have not lived up to the standards of having enough points to be in this place. And it works the other way. Leaders within the church hold people accountable, right? We judge others, right, when it comes to this. So we create shame and guilt in people when we judge people based on a transactional word. Right? And I'll talk about that in a little bit later. It creates pride. It can create pride and false hope and belief that virtue equals righteousness. And we're going to talk more about that as time goes on too. That all these virtuous, all these good things I'm doing are giving me a reason to be proud of myself, and I'm in church. I'm a good boy. I dress deacon. I fast, right? I win. I'm winning at Christianity, right? I'm winning at all these things. It can create false hope, which is false, right? It can create a skewed view on philanthropy and serving and tithing. We've heard of the prosperity gospel, right? It can give us that's how the prosperity gospel was born. It was based on transactional Christianity, right? That God will make me prosperous because I believe. Because God will make me prosperous because I pray, right? Because I'm going to fill a stadium with 10,000 people, right? And they're all going to pay $100 tickets to get in there to come hear my sermon. My sermon is worth $100 a pop, right? This is the prosperity gospel that's being preached in many places. Right? So it can skew this idea on I give to the church, therefore because of the tithing that I give, X, I need to receive something back, including this trip to heaven, right? That was promised to me if I give these transactional dues to the church. What it really becomes is it becomes reductive thinking. It becomes dualistic thinking, right? And dualistic thinking, this kind of black and white, win-lose type of thinking, is what now in adulthood we have to get over. I'm going to say this very loudly. I want you to hear this. Christianity is not a zero-sum game. The path to salvation is not a zero-sum game. You know what a zero-sum game is? Somebody has to lose in order for me to win. Go back to what St. Isaac said. Even the damned are dearly loved and cannot escape God's tender, loving omnipresence. Somebody has to lose for me to win. This is not a zero-sum game. But everything else is a zero-sum game, right? Every basketball game we watch, the Super Bowl this Sunday, it's a zero-sum. There's not going to be a winner unless there's a loser, right? And this is what sports has taught us. There has to be a loser. There has to be somebody down so that I can be on top. And translate that into real life. That's how some people have treated their Christianity. For me to be saved, someone has to be unsaved. For me to be good, someone has to be bad. That's not what we were taught. But it bleeds into how we do things. So it's a very reductive thinking. And I don't want us thinking black and white, right? We're not small animals anymore, right? We're intelligent human beings walking on our two legs, right? Hind legs. You're adults now, we're there. We can't be reductive thinking like this. It prioritizes results over relationships. It prioritizes attendance. It prioritizes presenteeism, a word which I learned literally 5 hours ago, right? And added to my slide, right? It prioritizes presenteeism versus relationships, right? You know what presenteeism is? I just learned this, right? This over-focus on my attendance and my being there, right? at work, all costs and all relationships, even at the expense of being absent. It's the dirty cousin of being performative, right? Like being a performative, right? So you can feel performative Christianity a lot. So presentism, right? This idea that are we doing this just so that I can be there? We pray in Sunday school. We did this when I was a kid, and I think we still do this now, right? We pray for the people who didn't come this week to come next week. Anybody do that prayer when you're in Sunday school? Anybody still do it with your Sunday school classes as teachers? I still do it as a reminder because I think it's funny. I make him laugh, right? David will tell you. He's been in my classes, okay? And he knows. And we'll say, pray for the people who didn't come this week to come next week. And when you're young, it makes sense. You care for your brother and sister that wasn't there. But what were we prioritizing? Attendance. How about we pray for our brothers and sisters in all their hardships and troubles that they are suffering from? Perhaps my brother or sister who was not in Sunday school with me that week wasn't there because their dad woke up hungover and didn't decide not to bring him to church that day. Because they got in a car accident on the way to church. So I'm prioritizing, hey, I didn't see you last week, man. What's wrong with you? As opposed to the care for my deepness. That's okay in 5th grade. Again, okay in 5th grade. Not okay at 30. Not okay at how old I am, right? Not okay anymore, okay? Not okay anymore, yeah? Not okay for us to think that. We can't prioritize attendance, right? And and we feel this sometimes from our spiritual fathers, right? Attendance matters not because of the attendance, but because of what it can potentially bring you. I said you can take a full class and not get an A, right? I could take a class and learn nothing and still get an A. Can I come to a liturgy, be there the entire liturgy and get nothing out of it? Yes. So the attendance is not what I'm looking for anymore. I'm looking for your presence. I'm looking for your attention. I'm looking for your connection. I'm looking for your relationship. All right? I'm looking for something much deeper. I don't want this to be performative, right? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of this world? The 4 liturgies I went to last week mean nothing, right? In fact, it could be harmful for me, right? I should remember to say that too. That's where the danger part comes in. Not only could it mean not helpful for me, it could be dangerous that I went to all those things and I was there and I was doing all kinds of silly stuff, right? And it brought me pride and it brought me arrogance, right? And it took me further away from God. So I can go to 4 liturgies in a week and move further away from God, or I can go to 4 liturgies in a week and find myself closer. I can come to every one of these talks all week. Now that you guys live in Orange County and you're around here, there's a talk every night. Talk every night in the week. I was talking to Boone about this a month ago. I can go six nights a week. I'm there. But these talks, these things can take you away, or you can be present. You can actually be here and not let it be performative, because what we're looking for is, I'm going to skip. I should have put this first. What we're looking for is transformation, not a transaction. This is a transformational experience that we're looking for, not a transactional one. St. Clement of Alexandria says this. He said, if God rewarded the righteous immediately, we would soon be engaged in business, not godliness. We would be pursuing not piety, but profit. That's a tough one, right? It's a tough one. Imagine, right, when you're young, I prayed to get into college. I prayed because I wanted a new car. I prayed for this thing. I prayed for this person in my life. I wanted them in my life, right? We want this certainty. My prayer will give me this. But if God rewarded the righteous immediately, we would be engaged in some sort of business. It would be a transaction. And we'd be looking for profit, not purity or piety. I told you I'd go from NBC to the Fathers of the Church, right? It's a very short turn to the right to get to where we need to be, right? So we're not going to be rewarded for this. In fact, Jesus tells us in his life that it's the opposite. It's not the righteous who are going to get what they want on this earth immediately. In fact, the righteous are going to suffer. You're going to have to carry my cross with me. You're going to have to carry your cross to be a follower of me. So that math ain't mathing. That does not make sense to me in the transaction that I hope for. That if I'm going to be a Christian, I get to have all these cool things and these access, these things. In fact, no. In fact, if I'm going to be a follower of the Christ, if I'm going to be a follower of this, it's actually going to be quite difficult. And I'm going to be ridiculed, and I'm going to be hated, and I'm going to suffer, right, in this world. That doesn't make sense to me, right? Just doesn't make sense to me. Christ-likeness, another father of the church, said this, that Christ's likeness cannot be earned. You can't earn your way into being like Christ. It can only be accessed through a heavy, heavy reliance on God and an immense amount of faith. That's the only way that this father teaches us. St. John Chrysostom talks about this. So how do we redeem ourselves from this, right? Even if we have thousands of acts of great virtue to our credit, our confidence in being heard must be based on God's mercy and his love for men. Even if we stand at the very summit of virtue, it is by mercy we shall be saved. I could do everything right. I could do everything right in my life. At the virtue of summit, the most virtuous human on earth. 1 million points I earned in Christianity in the game. And only by God's grace and by his mercy am I going to be saved. That's a hard one to hear too. This is why philosophy falls short. This is why this room is full tonight. Because you took a philosophy class and none of us ran away to become all followers of Aristotle. Why not? Why wouldn't Aristotelian ethics become the way of life? You took that class, right? You took moral philosophy. Maybe you had to take moral philosophy as an elective. Yeah? Why isn't that? Mabruk. You didn't have to do that. Yeah? Okay? That's the only class I failed at UCI, was my moral philosophy class. That's the only class I had to retake. I really, really struggled with it. And it's probably because of all this stuff I was learning. I was just like confused when I was in there. Or I was in the pool too much. But I didn't understand. But why does philosophy fall short? Why do so many people study philosophy and then turn to Christianity later? Because they were unfulfilled. It can only take you so far. Or study the ways of Eastern philosophy. I'm not just talking about the Greeks and the Stoics and those guys. Even Eastern philosophy, beautiful stuff. Wonderful things that happened before Christ that perhaps even laid the foundation for many believers, right? For them when Christ came and revealed himself, okay, now I know. But if I were to go study those things alone, my belly's going to be empty. It's going to feel empty. At some point, right, it's not going to give me enough. So this is why philosophy falls short, because even if I was the most virtuous person in the world, I still need grace. I still need him to tell me this. St. John Chrysostom says one more thing. This is another one of my favorite Chrysostom quotes. He says, "For to abstain from stealing and murdering is a trifling sort of requirement." If you really want to just feel bad about yourself, read St. Basil, St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil the Great, right? St. Gregory, the Father. Read the Desert Fathers. This isn't like you are the light of the world and, let's go. That's the beautiful, inspiring stuff. This is you're a trifling person, right? St. John Chrysostom tells me, to abstain from stealing and murdering is a trifling sort of requirement. But to believe that it is possible for God to do the impossible requires a soul of great stature. He says, so if you avoided it, you did it. I hope there's no murderers in here, right? There's no people who are stealing on a consistent basis in here, right? So now that you've avoided those things, good job. You're I'm not in jail. I didn't steal anything this week, Lord. I didn't murder anybody. Isn't that good? He said, good job. St. John says that's trifling. It's a trifling requirement that you had, right? You get a cookie, right? You didn't go to jail, right? You're a good father. You're around. You're nice to people. Good job, right? That's what St. John's telling us. He says, for he indeed honors God who fulfills the commandments. Great, you fill the commandments. In fact, Jesus said this when he was on earth. He said of the Pharisees, right? Because we're basically kind of talking about the Pharisees right now, right? But I'm not saying them by name too much, okay? But what did he say about them? I mean, he obviously held his harshest words for them, generally speaking, but he said, surely they will have their reward. He didn't say they're going to hell, right? At no point did he condemn, say, he said, surely they will have their reward. St. John Chrysostom said the same thing. He who fulfills the commandments, good. That honors God, right? You're fulfilling the commandments. I'm not taking away the small transactional things we're talking about. But, then there's a but. But he who does so in a much greater degree is he who follows this faith with wisdom. So if you can follow this faith with wisdom and discernment, that's much greater. You are honoring God at a much higher degree, according to St. John Chrysostom, than just fulfilling the commandments. Just doing these basic things that you learned when you were a kid, right? So how can we continue to get past this, right? It's just another small joke, right? You guys really want to save me from drowning, or are you just virtue signaling, right? There's another talk we can have about politics one day and political party, right? Just how we've just based this on, are we doing a good deed because we're doing it, or are we actually trying to help people? Look at some of these people that I have on here, right? This is not a philosophy lesson anymore, right? If we move past this, let's get into real life examples, real people who existed. Did God judge the people who I'm going to talk about right now? Did he hold their behaviors against them? If I was to use the first saint, top left from where you're sitting, Saint Demas, the right-hand thief on the cross. If I'm using the calculation, if I'm using the transactional formula, this guy's getting an F in Christianity, right? He's getting an F. He's a murderer, he's a thief, he's getting crucified, right? 99.9% of his life, he's lived in sin. 99.9% of his life. And in the last breath, he sees the glory of God, confesses him, and is saved. He gets to go to the same heaven as anyone else. He gets to go to the same heaven as St. Mary. He gets to be there. 99%. That's not transactional. I can't make that math work in my head, right? St. Paul, on the road to Damascus, spent much of his life persecuting the church, right? Killing Christians. Listen, even with all that he did after, right? Maybe it washes out transactionally, right? Maybe it washes out. With all the people he killed, with all the people he tortured, with all the people he persecuted. St. Paul was there when St. Stephen's being martyred, right? He's saying, throw the stones, stone that guy. Saul is right there saying, yeah, kill that guy, man. He's responsible for the first martyr. I guess maybe that's credit. He gets credit for that, right? I don't know, right? I need to figure out that theology. But from there, he has this revelation. He never met Jesus. St. Paul never met Jesus, right? He wasn't alive when Jesus was alive, right? So based on his life's work, the teacher of the world, we call St. Paul the teacher of the world. We call somebody who killed and persecuted the church, killed Christians and persecuted the church for much of his life, we call him the teacher of the world, right? In our hymnology. We say he's the teacher of the world. That math doesn't math up. St. Fatina, right? Who's St. Fatina, right? Samaritan woman, right? You know what we put in her icon? What it says up there? You probably can't see that, especially you guys way in the back, right? It says equal to the apostles. Man, that makes you breathe. That's tough. She's equal to the apostles. So St. Paul, who wrote all the epistles, right, who did all these things, the apostles who were granted the gifts of miracles, who were granted the gifts of healing, who were granted the gifts of preaching. They were granted all these gifts. And this woman, who had 5 husbands, and the person she's with now is not her husband, right? But she brings Jesus some water at the well, and now she's equal to the apostles. If I'm looking at this in a basic, in a dualistic, simplistic way, it doesn't make sense to me. It just makes no sense to me. She gets to be equal with the apostles. But this is how it works. This is how God works, right? And these are just a few of the examples. I was reading another good one to read. Again, I was just rereading it for fun because a friend told me this, but John 8, right? First 11 verses in John 8. We talk about the woman who was an adulterer, right? And the Pharisees dragged her out of her house, right? And Jesus is like ignoring them and writing in the sand, right? And they said, he without sin cast the first stone. And everyone walked away. And they said, and he told her, where did your condemners go? Are they still around? She's like, they're all gone. They're like, yeah, they're all gone. Go, daughter, sin no more. See you. Transactionally, doesn't make sense, right? Doesn't make sense. However, this is the mercy that we get to live with. This is the mercy that we get to, this is the grace that we get to live with. This is amazing. This is the good news. Man, this is the good news. The good news is all the things that we've done, all the things I've done, I still got a chance. You're saying there's still a chance. There's still a chance here for me, right? So the point is, people improve when they get external love and support. And when they don't, how can you hold it against them? That adulterer, the first time somebody gave her love, didn't judge her, didn't drag her through streets. Remember what, even in that story, it's 11 verses, John 8. Go read the first 11 verses. They say, the Bible tells us to stone her, right? Moses would say, stone her. And Jesus is like, he who is without sin cast the first stone. Go ahead. That's why he said that, because they were ready to stone her. If that's the case, stone me, stone all of us, right? The good news that he came with, the good news that came with the Messiah is that we got a chance. So when people improve, when they get external love, how can we be the light of the world and give them that love? How can we be in the light of the world and not judge and give them that? It's as simple as that. It's not as simple as avoiding meat and cheese during Siyam. It's as simple as, I'm not saying it's easy, it's as simple as going there. That's the hard thing. That's the hard thing. Father Richard Rohr says this. He says, once you experience being loved when you are unworthy, being forgiven when you did something wrong, that moves you into non-dual thinking. You move from what I call meritocracy, quid pro quo thinking, to the huge ocean of grace where you stop counting or calculating. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever experienced being loved when you're unworthy? Admit it. It's a hard one. Every time I feel unfairly hated, I remember that I am unfairly loved. I'll say that one again. Every time I feel like I'm unfairly hated, I remember that I'm unfairly loved. That's the God that we have, right? It's not fair. It's not just. You know what St. Isaac would tell you? You know what he says? St. Isaac says that if God were just, we'd all be in hell. That's what St. Isaac says. He said if God was a just God, if it was about being fair, well, I'm not fair. I'm in heaven. I'm pointing. Why is St. Damas here? He spent 99% of his life a sinner. I did all the good things. Why does he get to go to heaven and just like me? When I did all the good things, he did all the bad things. He's not about fair. God's not a fair God. He's not a just God. If he was fair and just, we'd all be in hell. We'd all be in this hypothetical hell that St. Isaac was talking about. Right? It doesn't exist. Every time I feel unfairly hated, I remember that I'm unfairly loved. He must increase, but I must decrease, right? In Christianity, in our faith, there's a sense, if we really deeply root this, that if I continue to glorify God, I will be glorified with him. And we're all just doing this dance together, right? That the more I glorify, the more I praise, the more that I'm going to be praised, the more I'm going. That's not how it is. He decreases, I decrease. Bob Marley says in a song, right? You give your more to receive less. That's Christian. Give more to receive less. So you want to live in a faithful communion with God? Continue to give more and expect less. Continue to give more and expect suffering. Continue to give more and expect hardship. And expect unfairness. People who die young. The good things that happen to the bad things that happen to good people. Expect the unfairness. This is it. He told us this was going to happen. It's not fair. The math doesn't math. But he must decrease, so I must decrease. 1 + 1 does not equal 2. It just doesn't. It doesn't equal that in Christianity. So we pray that we don't internalize this thinking. That we don't internalize this thought process when it comes to simplistically reducing God and our faith into this transactional way of thinking. And glory be to God forever. Amen. Happy to take questions, comments, blasphemy, questions. Yeah. Is there another mic or do I give it? Huh? Yeah. Which one? This one? This one? It's not that. Oh, I just read it. It wasn't on a slide. I just read it. Yeah? Huh? Yeah. You know about trifling? Yeah. It was too long to put on a slide. It was for to abstain from stealing and murdering is trifling sort of acquirement. But to believe that it is possible for God to do things impossible requires a soul of great stature. For he indeed honors God who fulfills the commandments, but does so in a much greater degree who follows wisdom by his faith. right? Meaning like you get you're going to get a reward for following the commandments, but there's a much greater way of following the faith with wisdom, right? I can send it to you guys, It's also St. John Chrysostom. You can, as my friend call it, quote mining, right? You can quote mine somewhere in there. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So my question is, if one of your athletes, obviously your athletes operate at a very high level. If one of them came to you and said, John, I'm done with the gym. I don't want to go to the gym anymore. You'd say, look, get in there for 5-10 minutes a day. Don't push as hard. Just get in there and go through motions, right? I feel like a lot of, at least for me personally, growing up as an adult, even as an adult, the spiritual advice that I've been given during low times is fake it till you make it. Just open your Bible, read the Psalms, just do something. So my question is there a role for presenteeism in moving towards transformation? And if so, how would you recommend people don't get stuck there?
Yeah. That's a great question. I've heard that fake it till you make it a lot sometimes, right? So let's say what we're searching for is where our meaning lies and what becomes most meaningful to you. So you started with like an athlete, right? That analogy. Let's use the analogy. Let's keep going with that analogy. An athlete comes to me and says, I'm over it, dude. I've been playing basketball since I was 8, I'm 21, I've just put too much time in, I'm over it. And we're like, you know what, you've lost your love for the game, I get it, right? Let's dig into the meaning. What are you missing in your life? Well, that's because I don't get to like socially connect with my friends outside of the game. I do this, so I counsel athletes one-on-one. So I have like a mental skills part as a health and wellness coach that I do. And so this is true story. I'll leave the person nameless, right? But this is normal. I've had these talks 100 times, right? And they say, well, I've lost my love for the game, coach. What do I do? So I totally get it, right? I totally get it. What are you missing? And then we just keep asking questions, right? We use motivational interviewing, right? We keep interviewing. We just keep going into it. Well, I miss my social connection. Okay, well, where are you getting your social connection? Where else can you find that social connection? Great, I found that. And they come back to me 2 weeks later. I found some social connection around this, right? I connected you to Athletes in Action, right? The Christian group, and now I got to talk to some people that are not on my basketball team. Basketball seems a lot better, right? Because I'm not missing something. So this idea of us in the spiritual faith and feeling spiritual dryness, right? And feeling like, hey, I'm going through motions, I'm not getting exactly what I want out of church anymore, I'm not getting it, is very normal. In fact, it's going to happen. It's not normal, it's like guaranteed, right? Like it's guaranteed. Like that's going to happen at multiple points in your life, right? So then this is where advice and spiritual guidance comes in, but you also can start asking yourself, what is it that is making you feel burned out? What am I missing? Like what am I missing out of this? And when you start finding it, that meaning, it's easier to put those other things in perspective, right? Because then you start really thinking about like, the hard part is when it comes to spiritual dryness and like the church and the readings and things like that, you burn out real quick because of the redundancy that comes with it, and you're also expecting some sort of return that comes, right? Like you expect that like, if I read these things, then I'm going to feel like, I'm going to start floating in air and, like God's going to open, an angel's going to come through the window, finally, because I did all this. That may not be the case. It's obviously not going to be the case, right? So you start putting into perspective what it is. So for me, I don't always like the fake it till you make it thing, but instead of reading a full chapter, I'll read a verse or two. I'll get something small, I'll go quote mining, right, for fathers of the church, right? I'll dig through the desert fathers and find 2 things, walk away, right? Instead of 4 liturgies next week, I'll go to 2, Like, see what I mean, right? You find something, but you also need to find the meaning. I don't know if one of you wanted to add to that. It makes sense.
One thing I would add to this is that the idea of presenteeism, there's, the spirit of it even is bad. I'm checking a box. But if you're showing up with the intention that, look, I have nothing to give you, God. I could literally care less. But I'm showing up because I love you and I know I'm supposed to be here. It's not presenteeism. I'd call that presenteeism with purpose, right? You're showing up with a purpose because you purposed in your heart to be in front of the Lord. Not because you wanted someone to tell you anything, but because you believed that that was what you needed. And that's the thing, is when you show up for God, that's the beauty of the difference between a relationship with God and anybody else in the world, is when those things you show up to check a box, people see it and it turns them off. But when you show up and you check a box with God, he knows that on some level there's love behind it. especially if there is love behind it.
Can I share the quote you sent me earlier this week, right, from St. Augustine? This is what you're saying, right? So we were just chatting right before this, right? He said, God bestows more consideration on the purity of the intention with which our actions are performed than on the actions themselves. So it's the intentionality, right? That's why people say, it says like, I'm going to fall asleep while I'm reading. Well, you tried. And that's all that God cares about, right? Like, I was reading the Bible, I fell asleep. I went to liturgy, I got distracted. But did you go to liturgy to check the box? Or did you go to liturgy with like I'm trying really hard? He's not going to get mad at you for making a mistake. Same thing, I don't get mad at athletes for making a mistake. You're welcome to make mistakes. It's actually going to happen. The measure of the spiritual life is in the distance between, right, falling down and getting back up. It's the distance between that departure from God and your ability to recover back to it. And so I secretly now use this with the athletes. Are we still recording? Maybe. Yeah, it doesn't matter. But I tell them this. So a high-performing athlete, the measurement of a high-performing athlete is the distance between you making a mistake and then doing the next right thing. Because if you make a mistake in a game and you're still sitting on it, you're going to make 6 more mistakes, right? But if you can make a mistake and you can get to the next thing right away, that's the difference. If a volleyball player, misses a block, right? And they have to be ready literally 2 seconds later to do the same block, right? Like, the distance between your ability to make that mistake and then get the next block, that's a high-performing athlete. The longer that distance is, the more training we got to do to your mind. So in the spiritual life, that's where I took it from. I took it from a spiritual father, right? Saying that's the distance. The distance is from that trying or falling to the back. Yeah.
Other questions? All right.
Is there any case or time where a transactional relationship is good?
It's another good question. I wish I was teaching 5th grade Sunday school right now because the answers would be a lot easier. Listen, God is love. Jesus loves us. Everything is good. Is that satisfying? No. Okay, darn. I don't think so, right? I don't think so because what we're seeking, right, is transformation. What we're seeking is intention. What we're seeking is that. Now, is there a place, I will preface it by saying this. On a developmental spectrum, the transactional relationship is good to a certain point. You are no longer in the early stages of your life. In fact, many of you are getting close to, you're approaching middle age, right? Or you're on the second half of it like me, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, right? I'm past, if you do the math, I know the average life expectancy now, I'm doing the math. I'm far past midlife. Anyway, I would say the early, where it's good, is I have to, listen, if I'm teaching that 5th grade teacher, if I'm my sons are 11 and 10 years old, somebody's doing something bad at school, right? What do I tell them? Stay away, right? That kid is stealing Snicker bars from the liquor store, right? Don't hang out with him, right? Get away, right? Stay away. That's transactional. I have to stay away. It's black and white. It's dualistic. But as you get older, it's not enough for you to say, hey, my friend is doing this bad thing. You're going to have to learn how to love that friend. Then you're going to have to learn how to interact with him. Then they're going to do something bad to you, and you're going to have to learn how to forgive him. You know how hard it is to teach an 11-year-old to forgive, right? I have to do it every day. Your brother, you punched you. Forgive him, No. Why would I do that? And I get it. It's hard to understand that, but you got to forgive. So that transactional relationship is no longer appropriate. You're going to have to move past that. You're going to have a coworker who wrongs you. You're going to have a boss who fires you for no reason, right? You're going to have a relationship in your life that goes really sour and it's not your fault. So how are you going to deal with it at that point in a Christian manner, right?
I think the only thing to just add to that is that relationships that start transactional usually end with a bad business deal, right? If you go in with the wrong intention, it's going to end with a split that's acrimonious because someone detects garbage eventually. You can't walk in with a bad smell and think it's going to be hidden, okay? I think when you're older in particular, the other part of what I really like that John just said is you're developing muscle memory on how to deal with life, okay? And if you develop transactional muscle memory, you are a miserable human being around. You're a terrible husband or wife. You're a terrible parent. You're a terrible friend. You're a terrible servant. Because if they're not pouring into you, which most people won't when you want it, you ain't gonna be good. Okay? You know, John talking about keeping score earlier. That's what that's about. Okay? I'm not saying he has transactional muscle memory. I'm just saying in general. That muscle memory is embedded in us because as kids, everything is binary. But as we get older and we evolve and we transform, it's required that the muscle memory of transformation be the focus and not transactionality, because then you will be bitter. Your resentment will come out. You will be aggressive with people. You will be unkind, and you will always go tit for tat. You won't get anywhere. Questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, in the back.
Kind of piggybacking off the last question, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Abuna, but there's some messaging in some parts of the New Testament especially that hint at sort of a delayed transactional nature of the relationship, in that there is reward in heaven that's promised. You know, you pray to your Father in secret, your Father who sees in secret will reward you, and other passages in the epistles too. Do you think that is transactional, or that you can get away from that transactional nature of that? Yeah, I mean,
It's a phenomenal question. So you want to take a first swing at that? You want me to take that one?
I'll add it. We'll switch roles this time. I'll go second. Yeah.
So I think that there's a big difference between a heavenly transaction, right, and a temporal one. Okay, there is something about the spirit or the intent being not malicious, but being disingenuous and inauthentic when you look for a temporal transactionality. But when we talk about I'm doing this, think about the transaction. The transaction requires transformation. You don't get to heaven by faking God out. You can't do it, right? So you can't put on a show and a front to say, God, this is who I am. Love me because I love you, in quotations, and then I'm going to get here. He's like, nah, BS. I see your face. I know who you are, and I know your heart. So there has to be transformation in that transaction with God for heaven. That's the catch. And so you can say that, yeah, it's transactional if you try to say if I do this, I'll go here, right? But in the end, remember that grace is what bought that for us. Grace is what bought that. Each of us has a spot at the table if we want it, but we have to go take it. It's our choice. So I would argue that even if you wanted to call that transactional, transformation is required for that transaction to even take place. You couldn't be the person that you are and get there. You have to be the person he asked you to be. Yeah, you see, that was...
No, it's perfect. I will say, though, that yes, it's a choice. What I was going to say is it's a choice, what he said. But I would also say that this is where some other religions go wrong sometimes, right? They take the verse that for great will be rewarded in heaven, right? I know there's tons of verses we can go to and say that we will be transactionally rewarded later. And this is how Islam believes that, right? We're going to go and I'm going to get all these like specific rewards that I want, right? And why as a child you think, I'm going to go to heaven, I get unlimited ice cream, right? When I go to heaven, or I'm going to go, it's easy to think that way, right? But that's not the transaction. You have to transform on the way. So that's why it's a choice. But you can see how, I wanted just to point out how you can see how it's easy to take those things and go down a different path than the right one, you know?
There was one more question. I think over
Someone's
here.
over there.
Alexa. Comment, okay.
The story about the adulteress being dragged out and
Yeah.
it reminds me of this quote I read, which was, the people who need love the most show it in the most unloving ways. So
Say that one again loud for everyone to hear.
the people who need love the most show it in the most unloving ways.
That's a hard one.
Anybody else? One more? Going once? Going twice? All right, in the corner.
Okay.
All right.
And then I got one last thing and then we'll wrap, you know?
Yeah.
Last thing, yeah, last. Because it's 9:15, you know? 9:11.
Okay, so I think you mentioned the Bible verse that is called "He must increase and I must decrease." So in terms of that, like, I think you mentioned that we should pray not because we desire stuff, but and then God will work in us. The grace of God will work in us in a way that we didn't expect. And Pope Carlos did that. He was by being a man of, not by being a man of, by being a man of prayer. And he prayed from his heart, not because he expected for us, for good stuff to happen from God. So, like, isn't that the way it should work with us? Is we should just pray and not expect stuff from God. And then the grace of God will work in us randomly. I don't know if I should say randomly, but in a way that we didn't expect.
100%.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Okay, to wrap, because I see Abdou Augustine. Do you want to say something? No?
No.
No? Please. I like when you do this at the end, because this is like similar teaching, is takeaways. There's 5 takeaways. Somebody tell me something that resonated with them, and we go, huh? Yeah. Oh, okay. So as a teacher, where are my teachers? Who's a teacher in this room, other than Gabby and I? Okay, several teachers, right? So this is what's called check for understanding, right? So there's part of pedagogy, teaching methods, I got to check for understanding, So checking for understanding, I don't say that out loud, right? I'm using the textbook, but when I check, just give me some things that resonated, right? A couple of things. Yeah, yes?
Every time I feel like I'm unfairly hated, I remember I'm unfairly loved.
Yeah, that's a hard one, yeah. Every time when I feel unfairly hated, I try to remember that I'm unfairly loved. Okay, good. Another takeaway? Just like 2 or 3. Something that you're going to remember on the way out. Usually haven't. Say that again? Yeah, no, be present. Yeah. Be present. Don't, not performative, right? Be present, not performative, right? Not in it. I like it though. I'll move further in the back. This is good. The further I move, because maybe they couldn't hear me. Another takeaway. Just give me something else you heard. Yeah. Huh? Done. Expect nothing, right? Do something, expect nothing. That's good. What else? Anything else resonate that you remember? Yeah. Yeah, that's hard. This icon of, so Matt's saying the icon of St. Fatina, what did it say? Equal to the apostles. The Samaritan woman, equal to the apostles. Blows my mind every time. Yeah, Habibi. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. All right, from St. Clement of Alexandria. Thank you guys for your attention. All right, appreciate it.